At the end of the class today, we'll talk about the exam, which should be next week at the same time or somewhat like this time. I don't know. So it'll be about 2 hours or something like that, but I'll tell you about it at the end of the class. So last time we were doing some of my favorite people, Haram and Chaim Weitzman. And we saw what the problem of their situation was, and where their mind was at when we were potentially 10 or 20 years from the Holocaust. And we discussed about how they perhaps really didn't have a clear feeling of what the West was like, and didn't know how disastrous perhaps the situation was. Now, we were looking at Weitzman when he broke down and started crying before the Peel Commission, and did not fail to complain about all the hard work he'd done and how difficult it is among the Jews and so on and so forth. And how another reminiscence, 579, a week after the vote I traveled to London 4th class because there was no 5th. Oh, poor Chaim. I went to Downing Street. I was living in Whitechapel. Oh, you know, you were living in the poverty area. I get it. And saw there the director of the Department of African Colonies, Percy by name, and in my broken French I tried to find out his opinion about the Uganda plan, etc., etc. Anyway, he talks about his work trying to sell shares in the Colonial Trust to Jewish families in the East. We, who had to exercise Herzl's orders as his faithful servants, had to rise against our master when it was Herzl or Palestine. Okay, true, but Herzl wasn't a fool. He didn't want to take Uganda, or later, as I said, the Sinai was offered. He didn't want to do that. That was an interim solution. The British didn't have anything better they could offer. But obviously he had laid the groundwork among the British to have a successful further offer. And I don't think it had anything to do with Weitzman, as I said, because that was 1904, and when the British launched their campaign into Palestine from Egypt in 1917, that's when they made the offer, plus they were anxious to get the Americans to come into the war. And they thought that that was also a good thing to issue the Balfour Declaration to ingratiate themselves to Wilson and his associate Brandeis. And we see from this text we had here how very Zionistic Brandeis was. Doesn't mean he wasn't a good American. He just felt that something could and should be done concerning the situation, and it be done quickly and effectively in the Herzl manner. These were all Westerners, you see, in the sense Brandeis is not Western in the sense that he comes from Europe or someplace. Again, Brandeis is a Sephardi name, so he would be an old Sephardi family originally, but he's grown up in America, and he was a labor lawyer in New York and so on, and he was very, very able. He went to the Supreme Court. So he'd be considered a Westerner, and we did read his passage we have from him. And you see this here, the apostolic devotion that the masses of Eastern European Jews had to Herzl, he felt was un-Jewish in its conception. And the means that they were going to use were not Jewish means, for it works with means which cannot be applied to our movement, calculated to grow slowly and organically. Well, yeah, that's very good, as I told you. But there wasn't time for any slow motion in this thing, as we can now with hindsight realize. So I don't blame these people, but in hindsight, they're just very unsophisticated, short-sighted, and unaware. And they're beating up one of their leaders for no reason. to be clear-sighted than they are. For instance, here, I remember having heard Nordau, we read Nordau, one of Herzl's close associates, an English novelist, saying 4 years ago, I refer to this without intention to polemicize, not much. 500,000 Jews shall go to the country of Palestine. 200,000 will fail, but 300,000 will remain in the country. I have always opposed such an attitude. It may be an heroic gesture from Germanic or Greek mythology, but it's not Jewish, you see. It's not Jewish. What do you mean it's not Jewish? Is it Jewish to be, excuse the expression, schlep along, as we say in the ghetto or something? Is it Jewish, you know, to be like Larry David or something like that, or Borat or something? Is that the only kind of Jew there is, you know? Why can't they do something in this way? You know, I mean, that's where Eisenman, I think, was not a bad person, obviously a decent person, but the wrong man for the wrong time, and we paid the price as people for that problem. Yes, 500,000 should have gone. In the Hitler period, 200,000 would not have failed; they'd have stayed, and he'd have saved 500,000 more people than they saved. So again, and this is written in 1927. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 was built on air, and a foundation had to be laid for it through years of exacting work, every day, every hour of these last 10 years. When opening the newspapers, I thought, whence will the next blow come, and so on and so forth. Well, it's still coming, as you can see. Just pick up the newspapers, look at Jimmy Carter's book and other books like that, and you'll see the blows never cease. Jimmy Carter complains against the wall. What, you think Jews want to build a wall? You really think they want to build a wall? You think they want apartheid? You know, they've been forced to build a wall because of suicide bombings. Did you forget what triggered the wall? And that the wall has been, why? Because anyone could just come across with bomb belts. You know, the wall really isn't very effective. It can get a ladder and climb over it, I suppose, but it's a little bit more effective than just having it wide open for anyone who has a suicidal mentality. And that's what was happening on Jerusalem virtually weekly, or sometimes daily. Suicide bells were going off in buses and so on and so forth. So they decided, unfortunately, and I lived on the West Bank, and it was a very pleasant intercourse between different cultures, but you can't have an intercourse when people are intent on suicide bombing and stuff like that, who don't value human life at all, not theirs or yours. And that's what's happening in Iraq to the Americans. There is no discussion because people don't value life at all, and they're willing to blow up like they blew up 67 people today. What for? They were just workers trying to get a job.